There's an amusement park called Six Flags Over Texas. Who can tell me what that means?
Six Flags flew over the state.
Say again?
Six Flags flew over the state.
Okay, what were the Six Flags?
Spanish, Mexican, United States, the Southern flag, the Rome flag. There's one,
You're doing well, Frank. You're at the gateway to the bank. The sixth flag is France. France controlled Mexico and its territories for a time. So there's one state of the Union which has had six flags fly over it at one time or another in its history. America has a similar history. Before we were a nation, we nevertheless fought with Great Britain, and General George Washington wanted a flag to be the rallying point for his army. And of course, in old-time warfare, you communicated on the battlefield with drum rolls and bugle calls. And with heavy gun smoke on the battlefield, you looked for the flag as a rallying point for your unit. States had their own militias, militias had their own regiments. There were a lot of flags over the battlefield in the history of the United States. But we started out with the flag of England flying over us, and that was before it was the Grand Union flag. The Grand Union flag of England, it represents Scotland with the cross of St. Andrew and England with the cross of St. George. You know, there's a cross like this, and over is another cross. That's the Grand Union flag. That was our flag before we were a nation and before we broke with England. By the time we broke with England, we had still the same flag as England at that time, which was a totally red except for the canton area, the area where the stars are in our flag. And that contained the Grand Union. So we fought under that for a time. And of course, the colonies had their own flags. There was the Gadsden flag, which said, "Don't step on me." There was a flag with a rattlesnake cut into 13 pieces or so that said, "Join or die." There was, in Massachusetts, the pine tree flag. All of these have served as representatives of the United States or a colony. But when we finally declared our independence from Great Britain, we had no flag representing our nation. George Washington used the British flag with the Grand Union in the upper left corner, but he alternated the red field with white stripes, 13 of them representing the colonies. And there was symbolism in that and in the colors. In medieval heraldry, red had a meaning, a significance. Anybody know what it is?
Blood.
Blood, or courage in the face of bloodshed. And white had a meaning also. Purity. You get up here and you do it. I appreciate it. No, I'm not putting you down in any way. I appreciate what you're saying. He's right. Purity. So today, with I'll use this flag. With the design of our flag, the red represents blood of those who shed it for America, and it also represents courage of those who fought. The white represents the purity of our ideals. We'll talk about those ideals in a little while. The blue has a special significance. Anybody know what it is?
Bravery.
Perfect?
Bravery.
Bravery?
The heavens.
No. Ralph, you said the heavens? Yes, you're correct. Blue is the color of the sky, and I'll explain that our ideals are all formulated in the Declaration of Independence with references to deity. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it says that there is our Creator, nature's God, divine providence, and supreme ruler of the universe, or of the world. Those four references to God provide the basis for saying that God, not government, is the source of our freedom, our sovereignty, our equality, our rights, our justice, and our human dignity. It's not from government, it's from God. And where do we find God? Well, we say we look to heaven, we look to God. And blue, therefore, represents the divine aspect of America and the source of all that we consider to be holy and sacred and necessary for dignified human living. I'll get into that more, but I wanted to get those colors out because red, white, and blue have always been the color of the American flag. Other flags have changed their colors. Now, we've changed our design, of course, but in the time of the Revolution, we colonists, Americans, wanted to have a flag which represented our unique view of ourselves and the nation. So while George Washington headed the army at Boston, took command in, I think it was July 1775, shortly after the Battle of Bunker Hill, he still had the British flag. And then he took the initiative to interweave the white stripes on the solid red field. On New Year's Day, January 1776, George Washington proposed a toast to His Highness the King of England. Was he being disloyal? Not at all. America had not really come to the point of saying we want independence. What were we saying at that time? No taxation without representation. We, the colonists, were not represented in Parliament. We were being taxed and mistreated without any recourse except to make written pleas to Parliament and to the King. But we were still loyal to the King at that point when Washington toasted him on January 1st, 1776. But then in February of 1776, a book was published by Thomas Paine. Anybody know the name of it? Common Sense. It was the first bestseller in American history. Now, we only had about 3 million people in America at that time, and this pamphlet by Tom Paine, which was laid out an argument for our independence, declaring independence from England, was such a powerful influence on the mind of the colonists that it sold 300,000 copies in about 6 months. And it's 1 out of every 10 Americans presumably had a copy, and the rest of them borrowed their neighbors and read it. Anyhow, it galvanized American sensibility and resolve to press on for total independence. And so we had the Declaration of Independence in July 4, 1776. But we didn't win our independence until when?
1781.
1781, exactly. And under what circumstances? The Battle of Yorktown, Virginia. That's where General Cornwallis and the British troops were run to ground, so to speak. Washington, assisted by General Rochambeau of France with about 6,000 French soldiers, marched double time down from New York and surrounded Yorktown, where Cornwallis and his troops were. He had us back to the sea. Well, you might think he would try to escape to the sea. No way, because the French Navy took its place at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, and when the British Navy came down from New York to try to rescue Cornwallis, the French kicked their butts back to New York, and Cornwallis had no alternative. He had to surrender, which he did. Negotiations were begun under a flag of truce, I think in September 19th, 1781, and 2 days later, with terms of surrender agreed upon, Cornwallis and his troops marched through the double column of American soldiers and French soldiers, laid down their arms, and upon the field of surrender accepted their defeat. And that's when we truly won our independence. 6 long years of fighting since the Declaration of Independence. Well, in 1777, with the fighting begun, John Adams got up in Congress in Philadelphia and proposed that we have our own unique flag. And he had a design in mind for it. Anyone know what it was? It's kind of big, but I think it'll... It had the 13 stars, exactly correct, and thanks, Leslie. Oops. Okay. And they were positioned in a circle as if a new constellation. That was in John Adams' proposal to Congress, as if a new constellation. So there were 13 stars, but this was not the required design. It was his proposed design, and it was followed by Congress and a lot of people. But there are other 13-star American flags where the stars are in rows of 3 and 4. Let's see. Or is it 2 and 3? Anyhow, a total of 15 stars in several rows. Notice also that these are 5-pointed stars. Legend has it that Betsy Ross was visited by General Washington and asked to create the first American flag. It's a lovely legend, but historians say it never happened. And in fact, the source of it was Betsy Ross's grandchildren, maybe 70 or 80 years later, and there was simply no documentation to support it. It was a family legend, and it caught on. But the real designer of the American flag, aside from John Adams' resolution in Congress, was another member of Congress who tried to standardize the flag with rows of stars instead of the circles. And the meaning of this was not truly understood until several years later, when the Great Seal of the United States was created. The Secretary of the Congress, Charles Thompson, in his notes about the Great Seal, noted that the red signified courage, bravery, bloodshed. The white signified the purity of our ideals, and blue was our looking to heaven as the source of all we value. Thanks. I'll just fold it quickly. Now, what was the date of Adam's resolution?
June 14th.
You are good. You are good. Flag Day, my friends. Flag Day is June 14th, and it is the day that John Adams first introduced his resolution to Congress. So, on Flag Day, we recognize our flag as a symbol of America, and we try to educate young people, especially, in the meaning of the flag. Now, is it Walker? Walker is here at my suggestion because his dad wants, Grandpa, sorry, wants him to know about the flag. Walker and his generation are young people, let's say, are 20% of the population, but 100% of the future. And if they don't know something, it's not their fault. It's the fault of their parents, their teachers, public leaders, opinion makers, and yes, even to some extent, we veterans, if we are not diligent in passing on the knowledge that we have in appreciation of the freedom that we have. And that's the fundamental value on which America is established, freedom. But why do we have freedom? What is the purpose of our freedom? It's stated in the Declaration of Independence. We believe all men are created equal with the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's why we're free, to pursue happiness as we define it for ourselves. Now, if that freedom is not used properly, if it's abused, shame on such people. But we're free in order to fulfill our deepest purpose in life, which is a search for happiness. So, over the years, the flags have changed, and I should have started with these colonial flags. Here is the Union Jack. Do I have? No, I have it back. Here's the Union Jack with the cross of St. Andrew, the red, and the cross, I'm sorry, the white, and the cross of St. George, the red. Okay, now that let's move forward in history to the War of 1812 and the attack on Fort McHenry. It's a U.S. fortification, military fortification. It was flying a flag. We recognize it in the words of the Star-Spangled Banner. Describe the flag to me. How many stars and stripes did it have?
15.
You're again. I'm gonna buy you dinner after this. Oh, you said that, Dave? I thought. Yes.
It's in the Smithsonian.
You saw that flag in the Smithsonian. That's correct. It is hanging there on public display, showing 15 stripes and 15 stars, because there was no standardization of the design of the flag, and it just became popular usage to add a new stripe and a new star to the flag whenever another state entered the Union. Well, by the time of the Battle of Fort McHenry, Vermont and Kentucky had joined the Union, and so they each had their star and stripe added to the flag, which was flying over Fort McHenry. And that flag was called a storm flag. It was of huge dimensions. I think it was about 60 by 90 feet. Pretty big. But the point was, it could be seen at a great distance. And when Francis Scott Key was on the deck of the British ship where he was being detained from going ashore after negotiating the release of an American, he looked through the smoke and the dim light of the dawn, and he could see this storm flag, this huge flag which had been created especially by the commanding officer of Fort McHenry, Major George Amistad. And there it was, still flying aloft. Our fortification had not been wrecked by the British. We still held it, and that was enough for the British to say, okay, another day, and they turned around and sailed away. And that was the end of the War of 1812, except for Old Hickory, who was marching down into New Orleans with his Tennesseans, I think. Anyhow, he got the word too late. He took New Orleans in early 1815, and then he found out the war was over. He was just having a lot of fun. So over the years, the design of our flag has been standardized. I think the legislation which created standard measurements and designs was passed early 1900s or so, but it was pretty well established just by general usage that the flag would have a canton, a field of blue with stars in the upper left, and the red and white stripes, 13, standing for not the 13 colonies, but the 13 original states. Until then, of course, the 13 stripes did mean the colonies, but this is the flag of the United States of America. So there are particular design requirements with dimensions and placement of the various elements stated by law. And every time a state joins the Union, the flag is redesigned, and the first official flying of that flag takes place on the 4th of July of that year. Well, if you notice out in the hallway, when you come through the front door, if you turn around and look behind you up on the wall, there is a 48-star flag. I gave it to the Senior Center here in 2005, and I received it from a man who received it from yet another person who was a living relative of a World War II vet who died and had his casket covered with a 48-star flag. That particular flag is in mint condition. I mean, it's beautiful condition. And I did not want to include it in our annual, meaning the Cheshire Veterans Council flag retirement ceremony, which we used to have. I didn't want to burn it. It was in such good shape. So I offered it to the senior citizens, or the senior center rather, and it's now mounted there with a wall plaque giving you more details about it. But the 48-star flag became outmoded when? When did the next state join the Union? Hmm? Hawaii joined in 1959. And then Alaska was the last state thus far. We may see Puerto Rico as the 51st state. Who knows? But there's theoretically no limit to the number of states which can join the Union, so long as they conform to our Constitution. Now, in 1960, the 48-star flag was succeeded by a 49-star flag, with the 49th star representing Hawaii. Yes, thank you. Okay. This flag is a gift to me for this presentation, which I do, from my friend Renee Gagnon, who is looking for another one. But it's got 49 stars. The field of stars is nevertheless regular in its design. And this was good for about, I think, 9 months until Alaska joined the Union, and then we went to the present 50-star design. That design was created by a high school kid who was responding to a national competition to design a 50-star flag. He submitted it through his congressman and received, he was designated the winner of the competition. I don't know if there was any money involved, but it was very prestigious. And just for the heck of it, he designed a 51-star flag. And Congress accepted that design too. So if we go to 51 states, we already have a design for that flag.
Puerto Rico.
It could be. It could be. That's a stretch, but I would love to see it happen. Oh, I mentioned colonial flags. Here's one. I think this comes from South Carolina, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, the flags which have flown over our states and our nation are possibly as varied as the history of any other country in the world. Thanks. And our red, white, and blue flag design is the third oldest in the world. The only older ones are Denmark and some other European country. I forget which. Just like our Constitution is the oldest written Constitution in the world. So we have a history of which to be very, very proud, and we need to pass that sense of history and pride on to younger generations. Walker here has said he volunteers to go onto the town hall steps and talk to the whole town about this, right? Just kidding, just kidding.
John, up in Rochambeau Trail that goes up to Southington Mountain, and it comes down and
In Marion.
a band, they used to live right there, East Farm School, and there's a cemetery right out in back of the thing out there. He
Yep.
takes care of it all the time. And, those
They're
are the soldiers that died when they got down in that area.
two French soldiers who were marching in the army of French General Rochambeau from Newport, Rhode Island to New York, where they were supposed to meet up with Washington. But in the meantime, Washington got news about the British General Cornwallis being trapped at Yorktown, so Washington and Rochambeau beat it double time down there, trapped him, and forced to surrender. But these two French soldiers died of some non-specific means or disease en route through Waterbury. They came from the northeast corner of Connecticut down along what is now called the Rochambeau Trail, which goes through Southington, Marion, not Woodbury, Southbury, and on over to New York. And those two soldiers are buried in a private cemetery behind a home on East Main Street in Waterbury. Yep.
He has the Boy Scouts help him mow the lawn down there and stuff. They put a new fence all around the place, you know, split rail plastic, so. But, it's pretty good. I've been down there.
We're off at East Main Street?
Off East Main Street. When you are driving into the center of Waterbury on East Main, you cross Pierpont Road, and then shortly after that is on the right is a large brick condo, and on the lawn in front of it is a colonial drum,
Yeah, that's the
which
map.
has a sign pointing across the street to the grave of the two French soldiers.
Yeah.
And every Memorial Day, they are honored just like American soldiers with a flag.
Right at the road after that, I never even knew that.
Yeah. Well, this is an example of American history being lost to modern times. Things like this were, I get tongue-tied at times trying to explain that there's so much history to this country which is being lost to the modern generation. And when I say modern generation, I especially mean young kids. Well, here's what President Woodrow Wilson said about the flag in 1917. The flag is the emblem of our unity, our power, our thought and purpose as a nation. It has no other character than that which we give it from generation to generation. For most Americans, their sentiments about the flag are not something they can easily define. To most of us, they are as individual as personality, as private as a family matter, and almost as personal as religion. Well, we need to inculcate that sense of reverence, respect for the flag in the younger generations especially, if this country is to remain America as we know it and love it. Without that, we will find ourselves in deep doo-doo.
Do you have any of the Confederate flags there or no?
Oh, Confederate flag. No, I do not. But that's a very good point. The flag of the Confederacy had the stars and bars on a field of gray. Now, their battle flag had the same design, but the field of gray was shorter than the standard design of the Confederate flag. So I've pretty much covered the, let's see, I've given you the history, the meaning, the design.
How to properly handle it.
What?
How to properly handle it.
Leslie, glad you've got it because I'm losing it, girl.
I'm reading.
The etiquette of how to treat the flag. That's covered by a federal law. In the federal law on patriotism, or patriotic displays, I think that's the title of it, there is a section called flag etiquette. And it is a code. The flag etiquette is a code, not a law. Being a code, there's no punishment for infraction of anything within it, but it is nevertheless intended as a guideline to you and to me on the proper and respectful treatment of the flag in all sorts of situations. So as I've said here on earlier occasions, the most recent change I know of was passed by Congress 4 or 5 years ago, saying that we veterans, even if we're in civilian clothing, can render the military salute during the Pledge of Allegiance or other such situations if we choose to, or we can continue using the civilian salute. So when we pledge allegiance to the flag, I prefer the military salute. When we hear the national anthem played, it is proper, according to the flag code, to stand at attention, If you're in uniform, do not uncover. If you're not in uniform, uncover. And then if you choose to use a civilian salute during the playing of the national anthem, you simply hold your headgear over your heart. Or if you don't have headgear, you don't uncover, you just hold your hand over your heart. Or you can render the military salute. Hi, Ellen, come on in. Taps is another occasion when it is proper for us to salute. Now, it's not prescribed. As far as I know, there is no coverage of taps in this federal flag code. But by long-standing tradition, when taps is played, we stand at attention, face the music, or face the flag if there's a flag present, and render the salute until the last note is concluded. And there's no clapping after it. I've heard teenagers doing this after taps as if it were a musical production rather than a sign of respect in memory of those who gave their lives. And that's an example of how young kids are not getting the immersion, if you will, in patriotism that you and I had. When we were in school, morning exercises always included what? The Pledge of Allegiance, a prayer, the Lord's Prayer perhaps, and a song. It could be scriptures read too. Now, since 1963, I think, there's only a moment of silence allowed in classrooms. But even so, the sentiment of patriotism is something which needs to be inculcated into our young people, or we just won't have an America much longer. The federal flag code says that the flag should be put up, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning or in the morning, and then taken down at dusk or sometime in the evening, unless it is an all-weather flag, which can fly 24/7, or if it's even just a cotton flag, unless it's illuminated in some way through the night. I must admit that I'm violating that. I have a flag hanging from my porch 24/7, but I don't take it down every night, put it up, because half the time I just don't even think of that, or I'm not around to do so. So thank God it's a code and not a law, or I'd have a stack of citations that big. But we want to honor the flag, and the federal flag code prescribes such things as being flown at half-mast. The president can order that for federal facilities. Governors of states can order it for their facilities. And by custom, if you have a flag which can be raised and lowered on a pole, then you too should fly it at half-staff for as long as the designated period prescribes. When it is raised in the morning, whether or not you're going to half-staff, it should be raised smartly up to the top of the flagpole. And then if it's coming down to half-mast, it's lowered slowly to, I said half-mast, that presumes I'm on a naval ship. It's half-staff. And you can find what's prescribed for each day. If you look in the upper left-hand corner of the Waterbury paper, at least, it has flag flying instructions for that day, half-mast or full mast. What else did you want to hear about?
In fact, the news tonight said that we'd raised the flag to the full staff. It was in half-staff for remembrance of the
Sailors.
people who got the destroyer that died in the destroyer. And it said it could be
Oh,
raised tonight.
the 7 sailors
Yeah.
who were killed in that accident off the coast of Japan.
So
When
so
it-
what if your governor does not declare it, but somebody died that, you know, militarily that you want to fly it? There was a situation once. I remember everybody was, because I can look right across to the Capitol from my office building, and people were calling because they felt that the flag should have been at half-mast or half-staff, and he never declared it until like, you know, a day or two later. I think because he got a lot
Yeah.
of,
The president prescribes it for federal facilities. Governors of the state prescribe it for the state facilities, and if a governor chooses not to prescribe it, while 49 other states do, that's his authority or his prerogative. Fortunately, you and I have the prerogative to
do it, yes.
go right ahead and do it anyhow. Bill?
At the end, I don't think you mentioned, when you do fly the flag, as you say, you two-block it and then back down to half.
Right.
At the end of the day, instead of just lowering it from half-staff, you raise it back up to the top of the.
Absolutely correct. Yes. And there should be a detail to receive the flag as it comes down so that it does not touch the ground. But if that doesn't happen, I mean, if it somehow accidentally touches the ground, it's not totally disgraced. You don't have to burn it. Now, the last thing I'll talk about, unless there are any other questions or comments here, is burning the flag. The Federal Flag Code recommends that a flag, when it is unserviceable, be consigned to the flames to retire it from service. Now, Scott brought in an unserviceable flag here. Leslie, would you help me? Actually, this is in a lot better shape than I've seen some. But here is a tear, a couple of tears actually. And I've seen flags that are all ripped and tattered along what's called the fly. This is the fly edge, that's the hoist edge. And they could be stained from something. When it's in that condition, it should be regarded as unserviceable and should be respectfully retired from service. The way to retire it from service, prescribed by the Federal Flag Code, is to consign it to the flames, to reverently burn it so that it's reduced to ashes and is unrecognizable as a flag. Not everyone has a fireplace or some means of starting a fire in their backyard, and if you did it in Central Park, you'd probably have 3 SWAT teams on your butt. But be that as it may, you don't have to burn it. You can dispose of it by other means as long as it's done with reverence. And what I object to, I dare say all we veterans object to, when there's a flag burning as a protest against some federal policy or action, is the disrespect that is intended toward this flag. I do not support that. To me, that's not simply free expression or free speech. To me, that's behavior, and I regard it as subject to regulation. In fact, there's a movement among veterans, especially by the American Legion, to have a constitutional amendment passed by the states to give Congress authority to prescribe how the flag should be treated. Well, just 1 minute, Frank. I'll come to you in a second. The other means of disposing of the flag reverently is to just cut it up into small pieces. You can then put it in a bag and put it in the trash. That's not disrespectful. I'll tell you what we do here in Cheshire. I started this process 20 years ago with the American Legion and the VFW. We put out collection boxes throughout the town. There's still one at the Notch, 2 at Hine Hardware, one in the lobby of Town Hall. I used to have one at everybody's, but Big Y doesn't allow that anymore. So if you want to dispose of a flag, simply drop it in one of those boxes. A Boy Scout troop is designated to collect them once a month, and when a certain volume is collected, they are turned over to Alderson Ford Funeral Home, where they are consigned to the flames of a crematorium, either in Naugatuck or Waterbury. It's done respectfully. But as Renee can tell you, the first couple years we tried the public ceremony of disposing of flags through consigning them to the flames in a 55-gallon barrel. It took us hours and hours to go through the 600 or 800 flags we'd collected. And we soon looked for an easier way to do it. No less reverently, but, well, there are just two things left for me to talk about if you want. The first is probably known to all of you, but that's military funeral honors. You know how to fold the flag when it's removed from the casket? Well, I'll just give you a verbal description. There's one person at either end, possibly four, each holding one corner, and it's stretched out full, folded once so that the field of blue is underneath. Then a second fold lengthwise is put on top of that. So the field of blue stars is at the bottom, underneath. And the person on this end folds it into a triangular shape, and then they keep repeating that fold until it gets up to the field of stars, at which point the hoist edge is folded into the topmost layer of the flag. That's something you learn in Boy Scouts, and I don't mean to talk down to anybody about this, but what is done with the flag then? The commander of the flag detail receives it from the person who is holding it between his or her hands this way, and then he or she turns to the survivors of the deceased and presents it to a designated person, usually a wife or husband, let's say, with these words. I'm not going to be quoting it exactly, but he kneels before that person. My arthritic legs won't do it. And presents it to, let's say, the wife, who receives it. Then as he gives it to her, he says, "Ma'am, we present you with the flag of our country in appreciation of your husband's years of faithful service." I'm sorry, I'm screwing that up. The President of the United States and the branch of the military service present this to you in honor in recognition of your deceased one's honorable years of service. It's short, but it's extremely powerful for the grieving survivors there.